Hello and welcome. So I thought I'd begin the episode with a little bit of a sharing, just of what I'm going through and just some things that I've been meaning to bring up in the episode. And I'm aware that a lot of the focus is on the reading of A New Earth or other books that I've read as well seems to be the centerpiece of the episode, to share the pointings and the wisdom in the books that we have access to. But there's also awareness that to almost share my journey as well, which is what this podcast is about. And I was tempted to record a private sort of journal audio, which I sometimes do, just to kind of get things, off my chest and not worry about how it's being perceived. There's almost, there's a way when we're talking to ourselves, we don't have to have considerations, or we can talk in a very fast way, we can raise our voice, and it's okay to be silent as well, and okay to cry even, of course, okay to express emotion, and of course there's a different energy when recording for an episode that takes place. So for example, the voice, this probably sounds a bit strange, but the way I'm talking now, I wouldn't say it's not fake, but it's almost, when you're talking on a phone to somebody, there's almost a phone voice there. You want to be clear, you want to have clarity, and it's different to a voice that if you're talking to a friend who's sitting beside you, you may talk in a different way. And part of me wants to almost reduce that gap as well. I don't want to almost put on a show, and I don't want to talk in a way that's directed, or that's carried through trying to be calm or trying to sound, softly spoken. Or it's nice to, when that voice comes out, because it's kind of that energy I want to bring to the episode. But I also want to be free as well, to talk in any way that comes up. And of course I'm quite self-conscious, so I'm not sure how much I can go there in that way, but there was an intention to do so, which is why I was, I thought about recording a private kind of audio beforehand, but then I decided just to record and still perhaps share in what I'm able to share in a public episode. And of course I've got the safety of not having to upload this afterwards if I choose not to, versus this being a live episode. Maybe it's good to start with today. I find as time goes on, it's harder to sum up the week, or the past couple of weeks. I find the question when asked, how's your week been? It's more and more difficult for me to gauge, to go into how the week was. Sometimes, quite often, it's hard to gauge how the day is going, and so recently for me there's been a consideration of several sort of mental health symptoms that have become more severe for me, and there was sort of difficulty in what to do with that, or how to get help, and the biggest thing that came up for me was the issue of labels and identity when coming up with mental health terms. For example, I can describe my health or mental health challenges as one of them is depression, another one is anxiety, and only through awareness and through reading books and living in this way, it's allowed me to have space from those labels, because the label can carry, in my personal experience, the label carries a great deal of weight, almost an identity, a way of and it's something that it's almost used to interact with. This is me, and I suffer with this, and in some ways there's a use for it as well. And it's funny, I began writing a blog post about this, that I'm kind of putting together a website for myself where I can post like almost journal notes, journal entries, and I kind of started writing it about mental health labels, but it's nice to perhaps talk about it as well. Maybe for a while there, that it became my identity of who I was, and it's so easy to kind of get drawn into that, because it carries a certain energy to that when you add on an identity to yourself. And we even talk about our name, that can carry an energy of separateness, without any sort of awareness around it, to recognize that it's just a sound. That some names of course may have deep spiritual meanings and a great tradition to them, but also you can see the temporary, the temporariness of it, the transparency of a name, and how it's only a very ripple on the surface. So while considering these new sort of mental health symptoms, and whether it fits into another sort of mental health diagnosis or label, I was very aware that I didn't want to get drawn into that. I didn't want to take that label on board and filter my actions and who I am through this label of and that's something that was it's a bit of a struggle, just to kind of process this path. And one of the reasons of doing this was I'm currently receiving income support due to my health and due to my current mental health. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, it's very difficult to kind of communicate in this way when certain language is not used. It's almost like if I didn't use the word depression, I was trying to explain to somebody who may not have a health background why I struggle with certain things and this and that. And but as soon as I mention the word depression or anxiety, or an array of other words, it brings, it's almost a bridge to that person who may not understand that one thing doesn't equal another, and there's almost a commonality, a common ground that can be reached. One of the things I'm also aware of is just my recent kind of, maybe this is one of the symptoms, my inability to articulate myself, to really put words to, how I'm feeling and what I want to get across. And to a certain extent, it's difficult for all of us, the feelings we have inside are so rich and dynamic, they're so complex that, words can, in some cases, never do it justice of how we're feeling. But that's become more of an issue for me to do, and it's ironic because I'm trying to do this now. As you listen, I'm trying to explain, and I'm realizing the difficulty. I can feel it there. So it may not be as clear as I want to be. So I've just been processing, these new symptoms and a potential, new sort of mental health, another sort of diagnosis on top of depression and anxiety. And even though there's awareness there's still a heaviness about it as well. With my health, there is because on one hand, I'm accepting, have the intention or the practice of accepting the present moment, whatever arises in the present, and not almost putting it in a box. If the mind is feeling very, for instance, earlier today and most of this afternoon, and even now in some respects, the mind is feeling very very muddled. It's feeling very almost inaccessible, whereas some days the mind may be like water, where you can dip in and have a swim around and see things clearly. Now the mind is almost like a thick mud, so it's very difficult to access and to convey things, to clearly connect to how I'm feeling as well. So that's been something I've been dealing with recently, and feeling the effects of it today quite a bit. And it's very difficult to separate or to know how to process and to frame, my mental health. And of course, I don't mean my in terms of course, we all know now the little me, the identity, but just as language, we use this way. So it's very difficult to kind of how to kind of see this and process it in light of, the practice of awareness and of being in the present as well. It's because the mind it's almost screaming for understanding and definitions and validation, but of course all the things the mind wants, it doesn't exist in the now. There isn't space for structures like this, thought structures and labels, and it's been strange. Perhaps it's been a bit of a tug of war, because at the same time I don't want, it's not as if these things are an illusion as well. Of course they are. The description and the pointing to them are, just sounds and words. We've labelled obviously a group of symptoms to be able to communicate about these things and to have a discussion, but it's been important for me to see through the labels, be aware of the symptoms, the challenges that come with the symptoms, but also, almost being aware that the label is not important in some respects. It's important only when dealing with things such as my health and explaining to somebody why support, financial support is needed for me. Then these words, they have a place for that. But So I'm aware also that this is going to be a bit of this might come across in a bit of a confusing way, and this is not something that can be helped. It's part of my current efforts to share things on this subject and to articulate myself. So I hope you can stick with that, and I'm sure we'll be able to see through things if I repeat myself, or if I haven't given a full explanation and left out one of the connecting dots. Then hopefully you can, see the picture clearly that I'm trying to explain and portray. And it's very easy to kind of sync up with these identities, because we're surrounded by people who live life in this way, and there's no judgment, or there's no wrong or right. It's just, this is the mode of living for somebody. And even earlier today, I was on YouTube looking up, some videos on mental health, and immediately I could feel my mind, creating or coding this identity of, okay, yes, this is what I'm suffering with, this is what I have, and in some ways it's true, there is those challenges, but in another way, when being in the present moment, that doesn't exist. In some ways, that mental construct of that label and that idea doesn't exist. So can I mention that tug of war with the mind trying to understand, and understand its own condition, which is a funny concept. And I think that's why I mentioned the mind is screaming for it, almost suffocating, because it's trying to, as part of what can feel like my mental sanity, is to have an understanding of its own condition, or a way to convey to others what I'm feeling. And sometimes the labels can be helpful in this way. It can explain for you. And one of the most painful and difficult things that I've gone through, and I've gone through many times, is trying to explain my health, and especially in a high pressured sort of way, where I'm being interviewed, for example, or assessed in regards to get kind of income support. And it's almost like you're in court and you're in a witness box, but there's a disconnection between mind and speech, and it's all muddled, and you're trying to kind of convey what you want to convey, but it doesn't come out. It comes out in a very a very slow or inaccurate or vague way, when what you really want to say is, I'm suffering, I need help, or these are the things I'm going through. What comes out is something that just it pales in comparison to how you're really feeling. So lately, that's been my that's what's been taking up a lot of energy, is to, number one, is to manage my health, manage my mental health, and what I'm able to cope with, and being aware of things that, when I've had enough or too much stress, or if I push myself too much, even simple things to leave my to go outside, to step outside. Sometimes that can be an enormous challenge for me, or to cook food, or things in this nature. And forgotten where I was going with this. Maybe I was just talking about my general scope and general challenges, or what I've spent my recent energy kind of processing and going through. And just by my observation, it's both at the same time deepened my sort of practice in presence, because at times when it's been so severe, it's almost, there's the feeling of almost not wanting to be here anymore. It's just, you just don't want to deal with that stuff, the mind stuff. So and a great way to not, and not to ignore it, but in some ways to step away from it when you're not needed to churn things in the mind over and over. When I've had enough of that, to go deeper in the present moment. It's, out of deep anguish, it's almost, it forces you to go deeper, and in other ways it's been tricky to step into the present moment, if I was to put it that way. It's, where the noise of the symptoms of mental health and the conditions and challenges, it's been so draining as well. It's been where it's covered up everything, so it's been very hard to sense the lightness of the presence, the spaciousness. It's not been possible at times as well. So yeah, it's been very mixed in that way. And today I just I wrote an email to a doctor to explain what I've just been explaining here, kind of giving them the symptoms and asking for help with them, and to get some kind of clarity and understanding of what's happening, and if it fits under a certain diagnosis and these things. And so and I find, when you're having a very, or when I'm having a very difficult day, such as today, it's the only thing that was in my attention is just that I'm unwell. That was the observation coming up, or maybe more accurately to say is the mind is unwell. The mind is unwell. And it's and when my mind is unwell, it's very difficult to almost take care of yourself. I find is, because it's the mind that processes information, that allows you, decision making, and okay, what can I do to take care of myself? What can be done? And when it's at a very severe level, it's when the same instrument that's used to process information and to, it has, memories involved as well, in regards to, even memory, with pointers to, if it was covered up, to remember that, let's return back to the present. Let's, times when it's being covered up. And of course, on one level, nothing is forgotten. The witness, the awareness sees everything. It sees you trying to remember. It sees the covering up and, the so-called forgetting of the spaciousness of now, which is in some ways impossible. It's everything is on that canvas of now, thoughts, feelings, emotions. And so just like, a drawing can't exist without that piece of paper, these thoughts and feelings can't exist outside of consciousness. It is that, but the perception is that, there's a forgetting of that, and there's also a forgetting of just general coping skills, or remembering the basic things of getting outside for a walk, and certain things that have helped in the past. And it can feel quite difficult when you're kind of almost feel stranded in that place, and trying to remember, or trying to access the mind, which is in this turmoil, to try and to help itself. I did have a moment when I stepped outside to go to a small shop to get a few groceries. There was the was enormous anxiety because it was a very busy road I had to walk down, and there was someone, selling a magazine, and there's also someone asking for change as well. And during that really anxious state, for me it's social anxiety as well as general anxiety. So there was a huge, I had to almost really step into the moment to just deal with that social interaction, to deal with the people around me, and taking it one step at a time. And I was really grateful for that sudden awareness that came in to just take this moment, and even going through into the shop where, looking at loads of items can be quite overwhelming, to process prices and to figure out what to get, or so again it was taking one step at a time, looking at one item and then looking at another, and all of that anxiety was still there, but it dimmed down enough for me to get what I needed. There was still confusion. There was still, should I do this or not? There was still the muddled mind, and that analogy I used, where the mind was almost solid mud, so it wasn't penetrable. It wasn't, you could access kind of logical thinking as clearly, or was it with great effort that could be accessed. So a lot of energy has been spent on this big picture, on being aware of the health of the mind, and knowing how to go forward with that. There's ways that can help. There's therapies. There's books, and I'm currently receiving counselling. I'm very grateful to receive counselling at the moment, and I'm not sure how much it's helping. It's hard to perceive it at this stage, and in the past I've read books on certain other therapies as well, and had to kind of separate myself from some that was too much to process, or that wasn't helpful, or wasn't able to get help from it. And of course, this all occurs within consciousness, within the aware presence of now. It just feels like a funny almost dilemma in some ways, where in order to function in a world, I have to engage in these labels, I have to convey that, and it has a place, and then almost to transition out of that into the practice of now, sometimes it can leave almost like Velcro. It's hard to unstick myself from that and return to the now. Perhaps it will become easier to transition into using labels and discussing my mental health, and when it's needed to be discussed, and also easy to be accepting of myself in the present moment, of what I can do, what I can't do. And I find there's almost a shortcut if, for example, I'm unable to do, let's just say, to process reading a letter and understand it. Sometimes there's almost a shortcut that leads to other kind of thoughts, that you're unwell and you're going to get worse, and thought concepts and other things as well, and so it's quickly separating the logical thinking when thought is needed to kind of assess myself, and to gain some insight into it as well. So using mind along with awareness with that, and then being able to kind of almost cleanly step into awareness again. There's it seems to be a difficult transition to do. So perhaps it will be a case where awareness kind of absorbs into the thoughts. So when I am conveying or trying to gain insight in myself, or having to explain my health to others, that there'll be space within that as well. It won't just be just a mind energy. And something's telling me that it seems just to be really difficult for me to explain and convey. So it's hard to know how clear I am as well, how clear I'm being. But hopefully this gives you a bit of an idea just about some of the challenges I'm going through, and if that's something that that just can be listened to, if it's related as well, if there's something from that you can resonate with, or you may know someone else going through that you can resonate. Someone in your life may be going through difficulties in their mental health, and so hopefully through this sharing, it can bring to light and bring some understanding and some relatedness to that as well. Perhaps it's a good time to just to have a few moments of just allowing the present moment to be as it is, to allow the mind energy, the thoughts to be as they are, as they flow, and just to a few moments of rest. Okay, so just before moving on to a new earth, just grab it from my shelf. Just wanted to kind of convey sometimes with a vulnerability and almost a severity with the symptoms I mentioned. It can be difficult to know how much it's okay for me to share, and how much it's not going to be a case of where later on, after recording or uploading, there's a reaction of regretting certain things, of how much in detail that one would like to share. Of course, I would like to be as transparent as possible, but of course there's also the element of those kind of deeper private notions of oneself, that we may only write in our own, if we each had our own sort of diary, private diary, then we'd write those thoughts, or what we're going through in there, and it was I'm kind of walking a thin line of trying to explain and be transparent with that, but also ensure that that I'm happy with how much I'm sharing, that there won't be a reaction afterwards of, oh my God, did I really just say all of that stuff, or say this, or bring this up? And in an ideal world, of course, everything will be accepted. We all, I'm sure, I could probably hear some of you thinking or saying, you can share anything, it's all okay. It will all be listened to with love and understanding. That we all go through. We all each have our own challenges. Whether whether there is, on a certain level, if we look at the health of the mind, like the body, we all have challenges in that area. Maybe not as pronounced and defined, or chronically, kind of diagnosed in that way, but we all have things we struggle with and we have challenges with as well. So, and perhaps I'll, obviously I'll just take each episode as it comes, but perhaps there'll be more of a habit, or more of a clarity when kind of sharing more about my sort of personal journey along, with the practice as well. As it's all one in that way. But I'm aware it's been a while since I've perhaps done a bit of a share of what I'm going through, and okay, so just to give you an idea of length, we're probably about halfway through the book, A New Earth, and I know it's been a bit of a slow process, depending on when I release episodes, and when I feel up to recording them as well. That can be something. So we are still in the chapter of pain body. Just skipping ahead, and we are almost at the end of the chapter. So there's a final passage left, and perhaps after that we'll see about whether to begin chapter 6 or to end the episode and begin that on another time, because I'm aware of the time as well, and again I'm aware that some people don't mind a super long episode, or there's many preferences out there. The title of this passage is National and Racial Pain Bodies. Certain countries in which many acts of collective violence were suffered or perpetrated have a heavier collective pain body than others. This is why older nations tend to have stronger pain bodies. It is also why younger countries such as Canada or Australia, and those that have remained more sheltered from the surrounding madness such as Switzerland, tend to have lighter collective pain bodies. Of course, in those countries, people still have their personal pain body to deal with. If you are sensitive enough, you can feel a heaviness in the energy field of certain countries as soon as you step off the plane. In other countries, one can sense an energy field of latent violence just underneath the surface of everyday life. In some nations, for example, in the Middle East, the collective pain body is so acute that a significant part of the population finds itself forced to act it out in an endless and insane cycle of perpetration and retribution through which the pain body renews itself continuously. In countries where the pain body is heavy but no longer acute, there has been a tendency for people to try and desensitize themselves to the collective emotional pain. In Germany and Japan, through work. In some other countries, through widespread indulgence in alcohol, which, however, can also have the opposite effect of stimulating the pain body, particularly if consumed in excess. China's heavy pain body is to some extent mitigated by the widespread practice of Tai Chi, which amazingly was not declared illegal by the communist government that otherwise feels threatened by anything it cannot control. Every day in the streets and city parks, millions practice this movement meditation that stills the mind. This makes a considerable difference to the collective energy field and goes some way toward diminishing the pain body by reducing thinking and generating presence. Spiritual practices that involve the physical body, such as Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga, are also increasingly being embraced in the Western world. These practices do not create a separation between body and spirit and are helpful in weakening the pain body. They will play an important role in the global awakening. The collective racial pain body is pronounced in Jewish people who have suffered persecution over many centuries. Not surprisingly, it is strong as well in Native Americans, whose numbers were decimated and whose culture all but destroyed by the European settlers. In Black Americans too, the collective pain body is pronounced. Their ancestors were violently uprooted, beaten into submission, and sold into slavery. The foundation of American economic prosperity rested on the labor of 4 to 5 million black slaves. In fact, the suffering inflicted on Native and Black Americans has not remained confined to those two races, but has become part of the collective American pain body. It is always the case that both victim and perpetrator suffer the consequences of any acts of violence, oppression, or brutality. For what you do to others, you do to yourself. It doesn't really matter what proportion of your pain body belongs to your nation or race, and what proportion is personal. In either case, you can only go beyond it by taking responsibility for your inner state now. Even if blame seems more than justified, as long as you blame others, you keep feeding the pain body with your thoughts and remain trapped in your ego. There is only one perpetrator of evil on the planet: human unconsciousness. That realization is true forgiveness. With forgiveness, your victim identity dissolves and your true power emerges, the power of presence. Instead of blaming the darkness, you bring in the light. And that brings us to the end of chapter 5. And I won't start chapter 6 this episode. Part of me would like to continue reading. I find that at the start of reading there's a bit of awkwardness. My flow generally is not too great when it comes to reading. It's a bit I find it's quite up and down, but after reading for a short time it can smooth out a little bit, and it's quite enjoyable to continue reading. But I'm just aware of my energy right now, and it's perhaps best to stop. But just before closing the book, it's great just to touch upon the national and racial pain bodies chapter, and it's something we can look at within our own countries that we're located in. So there's the notion of acute collective pain bodies that Eckhart has mentioned in certain countries where, it has a significant kind of violent history. The energy that has been sort of taken part in those countries as well. And it says, that for people, they try to desensitize themselves to the collective emotional pain. So within Germany and Japan, it's through work. In some other countries, the indulgence in alcohol as well. And in China's heavy pain body, it's mitigated by the practice of Tai Chi. And like I mentioned, there's a sensitivity that can be, that where if you are tuned in to that sensitivity, you can almost sense the pain body of the country, of the location of where you are. He says that, when stepping off of a plane, it hits you then. I think he's mentioned in an interview in the past of whether it's Germany or it might have been then where, you could sense the difference, the heaviness of the pain body, collective pain body there. And towards the end, he mentions it doesn't really matter what proportion of your pain body belongs to your nation or race, and what proportion is personal. In either case, you can only go beyond it by taking responsibility for your inner state now. So there's always a way to go beyond it, even if you're in a country that has a very heavy pain body. Your only sort of responsibility, the only way for you to respond to this is to take care of your inner state now, in the present moment. And just to end the final passage here. There is only one perpetrator of evil on the planet: human unconsciousness. That realization is true forgiveness. With forgiveness, your victim identity dissolves and your true power emerges, the power of presence. Instead of blaming the darkness, you bring in the light. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I wish you well in this one moment, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.